Okay, listen up. Listen. So you got 3 sheets of paper, right? 2 of them are front only, 1 of them is front and back. So the first one, this is all going to be one assignment. So the first one is going to be the history of classification. So the one with the pyramid on the bottom. That's the first page. The second one is the front and back. So the modern classification, that's the second one. And then the third one is going to be the domains and kingdoms. So all 3 of these pages are going to be number 4 in your notebook, and I'm naming them as the classification review packet because you are going to have a quiz on Friday. So this Friday, you are going to have a quiz on classification. I am going to use this packet as well as the PowerPoint in order to make that quiz. So I suggest that you follow along, do these worksheets with me, study these worksheets, and then your quiz is on Friday. Okay? Now, we are going to be using the textbook in order to complete these worksheets. But before you get out your textbook and before you start looking at it, I want to show you, in case you need it, in case we do not finish the worksheet in class, I want to show you how you access your online textbook, because by now you should know how to do this, and you should know that there is an online textbook for this class and for your other classes, but just in case you don't, here it is. So you are on the main screen of this class, right, or whatever class you're talking about. On the left is all your links, right? Everything for me is in modules. Okay. So if you scroll down, you are also going to look for this one. This is the McGraw-Hill link. All of your textbooks, for the most part, should be McGraw-Hill. So McGraw-Hill makes your textbooks. So click on the link, and then you will open it in a new tab. What it's going to do is it's going to log into your Clever account, because your online textbooks are through your Clever account on the McGraw-Hill app in Clever. So once you log into your Clever account and get into the McGraw-Hill app, you should scroll down and you should see all of your online textbooks that you have access to. Obviously, for this class, you will click on the biology textbook. You need to be off your phones and you need to be paying attention to what I say in case you need to do this at home. Once you get into the textbook, whatever textbook it is, you do not need to do anything down here. So all of this you do not do anything with. All you need to do is access your ebook. So click on ebook, and that will open your textbook. This button here is your table of contents. So once you click on it, it has the textbook table of contents. Now, our curriculum that I'm given, that I teach you, is not aligned to the textbook. Welcome to Florida education. It would be too easy if that was the case. So we are actually technically, according to the textbook, in Unit 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into Unit 4, and we're actually going to do Chapter 16, which is Organizing Life's Diversity. So then you would click on there, you would get onto Chapter 16, and then you would do whatever you needed to do. So now you can get out your textbooks. There should be one underneath you, and you can turn to Chapter 16. If you want to go ahead and skip to page 479, that is what page we will start on, is page 479. So go ahead and turn to page 479 in your textbook. You should have a textbook underneath you or somewhere around you. So 479, and then we are going to start on the first page that has the pyramid on it. So you need to have your textbook out and the sheet that has the pyramid on it so that we can work through these worksheets together. All right. So these first couple of questions are on the classification system that we learned about in our notes. So we need to quickly read this first paragraph right here under the Linnaeus system. Does anyone want to read this paragraph? Go ahead, Donaldi.
In the 18th century, Swedish naturalist broaden
Aristotle's
classification method and formalize it into a scientific system. Like Aristotle, he based his system of observational studies of the morphology and the behavior of organisms. For example, he organized birds into three major groups depending on their behavior and their habitat. The birds in the figure 1 illustrate these categories. The eagle is classified as a bird of prey. The heron as a wading bird, and the blue jay is grouped with the perching birds.
Very good. So that is our basic taxonomy. So that's where we've got our system of taxonomy. Is from this guy and his system. So from what John Naldi said, number 1 we should be able to answer. So which statement describes the Linnaean system? I don't know how to say that word. Anyway, that system of biological classification. Is it A, animals were classified as living either on land, in water, or in air? B, it was a 6-kingdom system. C, it was based on behavioral and morphological similarities and differences among organisms. Or D, plants were classified by average size and structure. Which one, John Aldi? Yes, it was C. So the very first form of taxonomy grouped species based on their characteristics, their behaviors, and what they looked like, what environments they lived in, what they ate, stuff like that. So number 2 and number 3, we should be able to answer based on our knowledge from the PowerPoint. So number 2, in a binomial nomenclature, the first part of an organism's name identifies the genus, and the second part identifies the what? Yes, ma'am. The species. So your genus is written first, and your species is written second. Now, the important thing that y'all need to know is y'all need to know how to write a scientific name. So you don't need to know the scientific name of the species, but you do need to know how it is written correctly. So these 4 choices, you have these 4 choices for the classification of bear, of the American, one of the American bears. Okay. So your first one is your genus. Your second one is your species. But how do you correctly write those 2 names? So which one do you think is correct? Yes, Owen. So both of them are capitalized. Does anyone else have an idea of what it should look like? Yes, ma'am? C. So the first one is capitalized and the second one is lowercase. So the correct answer is C. The first one is capitalized, the second one is lowercase. So your genus is always written first and it is always capitalized. Your species is always written second and it is always lowercase. Okay? Nothing is ever going to be abbreviated. So that A dot and letter A, that is not how you write scientific names. You do not abbreviate anything. You write out the whole full name. Your first name is your genus. Your second name is your species. The first thing is capitalized. The second thing is not. Okay? All right. So if you flip in your textbook to the next page, you will see this upside down triangle. Now you need to know what are the levels of classification, what is the correct order of levels of classification, and what are their names. So use that upside down triangle and fill in the pyramid that's on the bottom of that first sheet. And make sure you memorize the levels of classification and their correct order. So like I said, there are a few acronyms. There's one acronym in your PowerPoint, but there are a few acronyms online that you can find to help you memorize the levels of classification. So the one that I use the one that that helps me remember, is King Philip came over from Great Spain. So this is going from largest to smallest, and that is the acronym that I use. So the first letter of each of these words is going to tell you what the level of classification is. So domain, so usually what it is domain is assumed to be the biggest. And then after that is when so you could say, dear King Philip came over from Great Spain. So you could say that one. Dear King Philip came over from Great Spain. So we have our domains as our largest. Our second largest are our what? What starts with a K? Kingdom. What our second word is Philip. What starts with a P? Phylum. Our third word is came. What starts with the letter C? Class. Our next word is over. What starts with O? Order. Our next word is from. What starts with F? Family. Our next word is great. What starts with G? Genus. And then lastly, our last word is Spain. What starts with S? Species. So this is the acronym. You don't have to use this one, but I suggest you find an acronym that you like that will help you memorize the levels of classification from largest to smallest, because you need to know them in order. So, dear King Philip came over from Great Spain, whatever one you want to use. Okay? All right. So, let's go on to our next page. So now we're looking at the page that is front and back. So now we're looking at modern classification. So those were the early forms of classification that we had. Now we're going to look at our modern forms of classification that we have today. So what you can do in your textbook is you can flip to lesson 2 on page 485. On the bottom, there is a table that looks very similarly to the table on this worksheet. So take a few minutes, read the table, read the words. It's not going to be word for word. So read, look at your answer choices, and figure out what word best goes in each of those blanks. So you can use the table on the bottom of 485. our modern classification, we have 3 different types of modern classification. We have our typological, we have our second one, which is biological. And then we have our phylogenetic. Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at the description, and then we're going to look at the pros and cons of each. So for typological, that is your classification that is determined by comparison of blank characteristics with a type specimen. Yes, sorry, I believe that threw me off. So physical. So you're looking at the physical characteristics of your species. Okay, so just the physical ones. So your disadvantages of that is that the classification does not allow for genetic varieties, or what's the word in your word bank? Variations. Same word. Variations. Okay. Such as color within a species. So the bad thing about this, the con of this one, is that it does not take into account the different variations of species. So let's think about our dogs. We have a lot of different breeds of dogs that are very different from one another, but they're still the same species. So this type of classification would strictly look at the species of canine, of dog, of domesticated dog. It would not look at all your different breeds of dogs. Okay? But the advantage to it, so why it's a good one, is the descriptions provide detailed records of physical characteristics of many organisms. So it does take into account the very minute physical details of each species and how they compare to other species. So your second one is your biological. The description for that is that it is the classification that is determined by similar characteristics and ability to produce fertile offspring. So obviously, if you need to reproduce, if you're looking to reproduce and make more of your species, your offspring need to be able to continue that process and also make more species. Otherwise, eventually you're going to die out. So that's what you want to do. You want fertile offspring. So the disadvantages to this is that some organisms interbreed occasionally, and it does not account for what kind of species. Extinct species. Very good. The advantage, though, is that the working definition applies in most cases. And then finally, we have our phylogenetic classification, and that is determined by very good. Evolutionary history. The disadvantage is that evolutionary histories are not known for all species, because we still don't even know if we have all the species. But the advantage is that accounts for extinct species considers molecular data. And solves problems of other species concepts. So depending on which one you're using, you could use all 3. There's not one that's better than the other one. So depending on which one you're using will depend on how you're going to look at the species and how they differentiate from other species. All right, 8, 9, and 10, I'm going to give you. So for your quiz on Friday, I'm not going to really look at this page to make your quiz. Okay. Number 8, features of body structure such as type of beak and wings on birds. Those are morphological characteristics. Chromosome banding patterns that show the close relationship among chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Those are biochemical characters. And then lastly, model that uses comparisons of DNA sequences to estimate how long species have been evolving independently. That is your molecular clock. Cab. All right. So now you're going to flip over. And now we are going to look at what? What are those called? What is that called? Cladogram. That is a cladogram. So this type of diagram is a cladogram. And you guys need to be able to know how to read and interpret a cladogram. So that's what we're going to do now. So number 12, identify which dinosaur is the most recent common ancestor of the robin. So we're looking at our robin, which is here, and we're looking at our other one, which is this word. So which one of those? So we're looking at this one. Sorry. We're looking at this one. Okay, so these two species, what is the most common ancestor for those two species? Velociraptor, the one that is the most close to both of those species. So it wouldn't be this one, or this one, because you have this Velociraptor that is the closest to both of those species. So your most common ancestor to both of those is the Velociraptor. All right, so the thing that you need to memorize the most, the thing that you need to understand the most about a cladogram is when a organism has a characteristic and when it doesn't have a characteristic. So if we're looking at this species and we're looking at these two characteristics, so if the characteristic is to the right of the species, so our species branched off here, if our characteristic is to the right, that means that our species branched off before it could get these characteristics. So if the characteristic is to the right, that means that it does not have that characteristic. So it branched off before it could get this feature. So if the characteristic is to the right, then it does not have that feature. But if the characteristic is to the left, then it does have that feature. Because notice where this species branched off. So over time, it got here, and then at this point, it went somewhere else. It branched off. So it has all of these characteristics, but it does not have this one because it branched off before it could get this one. But since we have our robin over here, our robin, since it's on the far right, our robin has all of these characteristics because it is to the right of all of our characteristics. So if the characteristic is to the right, it does not have it. If the characteristic is to the left, then it does have it. All these characteristics are to the left of the branch for the robin. That's what I meant to say. That these characteristics are to the left of the branch for the robin, so the robin has all of these. Okay. So number 13, determine which traits are shared by those two species. So which characteristics are shared by those two species? So is this one, do both of these species have this characteristic? No, because this one branched off before it could get it. So this one is not shared by both of those species. What other ones are? What are the ones that are shared? Everything else. So this one, this one, this one, and this one. All of those characteristics are what you need to put for number 13. So when you're reading this, you're reading from left to right. This is the earliest ancestor. This ancestor may not have all of the characteristics because through evolution, you have branchings of different species that have either retained some of the characteristics or because of evolution, they weren't able to get those characteristics. So every time you have a branching off, whatever characteristic is to the right of that branch, that species does not have that characteristic. If the characteristic is to the left, it does have that characteristic. So this species has these 4 characteristics. Our robin has all 5 of them, but they're asking for the ones that they have in common, so you would not look at this characteristic because this species does not have this characteristic. You guys need to know how to read a cladogram, okay? All right, so number 14, 15, and 16. Number 14, a branch of a cladogram is called a clade. Is that true? So those you're answering true or false. So is that true or false? It is true. So your groups up here are called your clades. Your intersections, wherever your branches meet this bottom line, those are your nodes. And then you have your earliest, your root over here, your earliest ancestor over there. Okay? So a branch of a cladogram is called a clade. Where those branches intersect are nodes. And then the beginning one is your root. Number 15, scientists have discovered and described 4 million species. Someone want to Google that for me? So what is...
Oh, yes, that's true. 8.7. Yeah, 8.7 million.
Okay, so my key says either.
Oh, but it says discovered and described. It says currently 1.64 million have been named.
Okay, so what I'm thinking, why the answer is either. So it's either true or false, because what you have to remember is the front of this worksheet that talks about the 3 types of classification. So depending on which type of classification you're using, it could determine the number of species that you have discovered. So that one's not the best question, so I wouldn't worry too much about that one. You do not need to know how many species have been discovered. You don't need to know that, because depending on what classification you're using, what system of classification you're using, will give you different numbers. Okay? Because there's different scientists that use those 3 different classification systems. All right, last one. Number 16, Darwin and Haeckel used the analogy of a wheel to represent phylogenies. So in your PowerPoint, we talked about cladograms, and then we talked about a phylogeny tree. Both of these, this cladogram and the phylogeny tree, are both phylogenies. So do these look like wheels, or do they look like tree branches coming off of a tree trunk? They look like tree branches, so they're going to branch off of a main thing. So do they look like wheels?
No.
No, so they did not. So this is false. So those Darwin and Haeckel used the analogy of a tree of life. So this should be tree of life, not a wheel. Okay? All right, last page. Oh, we're doing great, almost done. Make sure you study this packet when you go to study for your quiz on Friday. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is domains and kingdoms. So, you need to know the levels of classification. So, dear King Philip came over from Great Spain. You need to know those. But, obviously, you don't need to know all of those levels of characteristics. You don't need to know, like, specific examples of all of those levels of characteristics. That's just too much for you guys to have to know. So, what you do need to know is you do need to know the different domains, because there's only 3 of them, and you need to know some of the kingdoms in those domains. So go ahead and you can skip to page 494. So 494 and 495 talk about each of the 3 domains and the kingdoms in each of those 3 domains. There is also on page 496, there's also a table that looks a lot like the table that I had you copy for assignment number 2. So you can either use these 2 pages or you can use this table, but you need to fill out this table on your worksheet using the words up here in your word bank. Now, I will tell you, they gave you bacteria, the word bacteria twice. Because notice, okay, you have 9 lines, right? So you should have 9 words, right? But if you count, you only have 8. So bacteria is used twice, and also archaea is used twice. So archaea, the word archaea is used twice and the word bacteria is used twice. So go ahead and take a few minutes to fill out this table according to the one that's in your textbook, or the one that the notes that we took, the table that I had you copy. So when you're doing your domains, make sure you're reading the description of the domain so you write the correct domain on the correct line. For example, this one says prokaryotes whose cell walls do not contain this peptide. So which domain is a prokaryote that does not contain that peptide? Archaea. So that is archaea. What is the only kingdom inside archaea? Archaea. So that's why I said you should be using those two words, that word twice. All right. What is the prokaryote whose cell wall does contain that peptide? So that is your domain, bacteria. And what is the only kingdom inside bacteria? Bacteria. Okay. So then what's your third and last domain? Eukarya. That's the one that we are in. Eukarya. Did I spell that right? Yeah. Okay. So now, what are your four kingdoms that are inside your eukarya? Protista, fungi, plantae, animalia, however you want to say it. The animal one. All right. Number 10, 11, and 12. So number 10, organisms are classified into domains according to cell type and structure, cell type, structure, and nutrition, or just nutrition. So domains are your biggest, most general broad. So you're only going to be looking at your cell type and structure. So domains only look at two things, cell type and structure. Your kingdoms, since your kingdom is a little bit more specified, it's a smaller level of classification, your kingdoms are going to look at your cell type, structure, and nutrition. So how is that organism going to get food? Okay. So 10 is B for domains. Number 11, which organisms are in the same kingdom because they cannot form organs? So what you would have to do, or what you should have done, is you should have read in your textbook when you were looking at your eukarya domain and you're looking at your protista. Protista are eukaryotes that do not have organs, that cannot grow organs. but they are still classified as eukaryotic cells or eukaryotic organisms. Number 12, which kingdom's organisms have no cell walls at all? A, Animalia. That's us. And then the last question wants you to explain why viruses are not included in the biological classification system, Donovan.
They don't have DNA or contain cells or nucleic acids like proteins.
So they don't have cells. Did the book say they don't have DNA?
Yeah.
No, I thought they had DNA, but the most important one is they don't have cells. And what else? There's one other thing. They are not living. So they don't have cells and they are not living. Those two very important factors keep them from being able to be in any domain in any kingdom, because you have to have a living species in order to be classified. If you are not living, then you do not count, basically. So viruses are not living. They are literally just a ball of DNA, which is what I thought. I'll have to look, I guess. But they are not living. If they are on their own, they will eventually die. They need a host in order to survive. Yes, so all three of those pages are for number 4. That is your classification review packet. Your quiz is on Friday on classification.
I think they do have DNA because that's what they.
Sure, they have DNA because they just do